For today's episode, I had to figure out how long it would take to get from Knoxville to Memphis without the interstate, because it didn't exist yet. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome back to the Lore Lodge. Way back in the year 1951, a young woman by the name of Evangeline Lorimer went missing while camping in the Great Smoky Mountains. She was taking a break from her student nursing job in Cincinnati to go on a birthday trip with her father, a preacher out of Seattle by the name of W.H. Lorimer. Just really quick, some of the papers referred to him as W.M. Lorimer, and to be honest, I couldn't find either of those names in public records. Rather, I guess I should say that I found too many of those names in public records, and it was very difficult to figure out who this was. That said, I have no doubt that either of these people existed because they are very well documented in the papers. In any case, they had camped together before, and this seemed like something of a father-daughter bonding experience. That bonding experience may have been necessary because, so far as I can tell, it seems that Evangeline Lorimer's parents were either estranged or divorced. And while her father ended up in Seattle, her mother was living in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Evangeline was experienced in hiking and camping, so her father was not very concerned when she told him she was just going to go off on a quick solo hike out of Cades Cove. If there was any reason to be concerned, it would have been what her father described as a tendency to turn off trail to make little side expeditions, from which she always returned. And while that may seem like it's not a huge deal, it's not the safest choice for someone who lacks familiarity with the Appalachians. As you can probably assume, Evangeline did not return before dark, and after her father reported her missing to the Rangers, they launched what was, at the time, the largest search in Great Smoky Mountains National Park history. Searchers were instructed to look for a 5-foot 8-inch tall, 140-ish pound brunette with blue eyes and glasses, wearing blue jeans, a blouse or sweater, a jacket, and low-top white shoes. They combed trails, interviewed travelers, and searched every inch of brush that they could access, but to no avail. Meanwhile, tips flooded in from all over Tennessee, while others pointed towards South Carolina or even Arizona. But none of that could prepare searchers for the conclusion to this case, which may be one of the most inexplicable incidents we've ever covered. And you know what else is inexplicable? The fact that in the year of our Lord, 2024, people still engage in bad habits. And that is what our sponsor for today's video, our beloved partner, Fume, is here to fix. Oh, I'm covering it. Oh, not that. Fume is here to fix. This little wood and metal baby right here is an award-winning, innovative device meant to help you break bad habits, and I think you know which ones I'm talking about. If you don't yet, I will demonstrate how the device works. You simply take this little airflow dial, adjust it to your preference, and then you just... As you'll notice, there is no smoke or vapor emerging from my lips. You know why that is? It's because inside this guy is a little flavoring stick. This one's raspberry lemon. What this little bad boy is a 100% plant material based flavoring stick, I guess is the thing to call it. And when you order the Fume Journey Pack, you get several of those. And as far as replacing that goes, you just pop your little finger in here, take it out, grab another one, stick that in. Good to go. Part of what I love about this guy is that it's also a good little fidget toy. It's got good heft to it. It's weighty, probably like 4 ounces, I would say. And because I'm a man who has a desk, I also like this guy. It's Fume's base. It's literally just called the base, and it's just magnetic. Little guy, little floats here a little bit. I like it. But if I'm being perfectly honest, the biggest reason that I'm happy to hawk this guy to you again is that we have people in our comments who have told us their success stories. It's no longer just Fume saying, hey guys, thousands of success stories. I can tell you that we have a couple dozen success stories in our comments. I also have friends who are trying to break those bad habits who are using this now. And the coolest part of that is that it's working for them. So if you'd like to give Fume a try, I also have a little fun thing for you, which is that for a limited time, you can also get the base for free. And to do that, you go to tryfume.com, that is tryfum.com, or scan the code on your screen right now and use code LORELODGE. Once again, that is tryfume.com, and use code LORELODGE to get the Journey Pack with a free base for a limited time.
Now watch this drive.
June 8th, 1951 should have been a perfectly enjoyable day for 20-year-old Evangeline Lorimer and her father. According to a June 11th article in the Knoxville News-Sentinel, their campsite was near the Cable Mill area in the Cades Cove section of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Now, Aiden and I have actually been down to Cades Cove. It is beautiful, and we've also been outside of Cades Cove, and it is dense. There isn't a ton of information available about this camping trip. In fact, where precisely the campsite even was is kind of hard to tell because it's been, 70 years. What I mean by that is in the papers it says the Cable Mill campsite, but today, Cades Cove maps don't have a Cable Mill campsite. And that was kind of a consistent problem throughout this episode as I was researching, was finding that very often there were trails mentioned and roads mentioned, sites mentioned that just aren't there anymore, or they've been renamed. In any case, sometime around 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon, she told her dad that she was gonna go for a short hike west on a trail out of Cades Cove. The same article in the News-Sentinel also notes that she was last seen by a Miss Lois Coda near the Coda's family farm around 3:30 in the afternoon. Precisely what happened after that, at least on the 8th and 9th, is kind of hard to say. No articles from the 9th or the 10th seem to discuss the missing girl or the efforts to find her. As far as the evidence went, they turned up only one clue since she was reported missing, according to a quote from Chief Ranger R.E. Mernon that was published in the Sentinel out of Winston-Salem, North Carolina. He went on to say that they found a top coat she had been wearing yesterday on a mountain about 5 miles from her camp. To be clear, they found the top coat yesterday, as in they found it on the 10th. Not she was wearing it yesterday. Now, no location is given, but the papers did report that the jacket was found 50 feet from either a jeep trail or an access road, and that placed it somewhere along the Rabbit Creek Trail. With regard to why she would leave the jacket behind, the Johnson City Press reported Mernon to have said it looked as if she had got tired of carrying or wearing the coat and discarded it. Now, I would love to tell you what the temperature was, but finding accurate temperature records from in the mountains from 1951 is not something that's exactly doable. Sometimes it is. Not this time. At least not within a week online. It should be said that being off-trail, without shelter or food or a jacket, really anything, would be a problem anywhere in the Smokies, but Evangeline was in an even worse situation. What I mean by that is that a National Park Service spokesman told the media, "Step off the trail there and you're in some of the wildest terrain of the Great Smokies." And it wasn't just the terrain. In an article published on June 11th in the Reedsville Review, the author noted that this section was where man-eating bears roam at will. That said, there were other articles, including one in the Sentinel, which noted that Chief Ranger Mernon expressed the belief that bears would not molest the girl. He did, however, say that rattlesnakes and copperheads were a legitimate concern, and I have a fun anecdote about copperheads. Way back in what I believe would have been the year 2010, I was a Boy Scout, and I was at Camp Horseshoe on the Maryland-Pennsylvania border, also known as the Mason-Dixon line. It was great. I'd wake up in the north, and then I'd go swimming in the south. But the part that's relevant is one morning when we were doing the waking up part of things, a kid who was not actually even in our troop, he had stayed for a second week and had just been assigned to stay with our troop, cannot remember his name for the life of me, he was probably 13 or 14, he woke up and screamed. Now, the reason was valid. There was a snake on his sleeping bag, on his stomach, just right on top of him, and that snake looked to be a copperhead, and up there we had copperheads. It was one of the first things they warned you about as a camper. There are copperheads around here, and copperheads, if they bite you, will kill you. So my entire Boy Scout troop just kind of was trying to figure out how to get a handle on this potentially very venomous snake as this poor kid is laying there with the snake on his stomach, just trying his best not to move. Eventually, one of the older scouts, not one of the scoutmasters, one of our patrol leaders, grabbed a sleeping bag, the case for a sleeping bag, and using a stick managed to shove the snake into the sleeping bag case, which we then, pulled the cord tight, zipped the thing down, and carried it up to the nature center, where they, A, were like, "Damn, guys, nice job," and B, that's not a copperhead. As it turned out, it was another species of snake that adopted copperhead coloration, I guess to make others assume it was venomous, to protect against predators. I'm not a zoologist. I don't know how these things work. All I know is that, I don't know, it was just kind of a fun experience. Not for him, but for the rest of us. It's kind of Indiana Jones-ish. But going back to the story at hand, the primary concern, the immediate concern for Evangeline was not wild animals. It wasn't that she would be, attacked by something. It was the lack of food and shelter. You see, while it was June, it was also the Smokies and it was the 1950s. It was cold up there at night. The temperatures would get down into the 40s while she was missing. And this was a problem because a June 11th article in the Washington Daily News reported that she was believed to be not just without food and, warmer clothing, but also without matches. And in the Knoxville News Sentinel article from the same date, it was clarified that she had no pack either, so there was no way for her to store anything. Fortunately, by June 12th, the news was out and there were hundreds of both professional and volunteer searchers scattered across the western extreme of Great Smoky Mountains National Park, trying to piece together where Evangeline may have gone. One paper reported that veteran mountain guides said that a person who gets lost in the mountains should follow the nearest stream down the mountainsides. This was followed by, the streams always lead to civilization, they said, which isn't exactly a match with what the National Park Service said. See, the Chattanooga Daily Times for the 12th quoted Chief Ranger Murnin as saying, "Some of the canyons in that area in the west central portion of the park are virtually impenetrable." And he went on to say, if she's lost in one of those, we'll probably have a difficult time finding her. So, veteran mountain guides versus National Park Service advice is actually just polar opposites in this case. It isn't necessarily that the mountain guides overall were wrong, it was just that the Smokies are not really the kind of place where that advice holds true. The dense undergrowth, steep ridges, and lack of sight lines make it extremely difficult to navigate the park, and many of these drainages run for miles and miles without ever crossing a trail. And from where Evangeline's jacket was found, if you were to try and work your way out that way, you'd be going at least 5 to 8 miles. Of course, from where Evangeline's jacket was found, there was a trail directly to the east, and then there was also a service road to the south. But if she had found either of those, if she was as experienced as was said, she should have been able to find her way back, or at least she should have known the best thing to do is to sit and stay put on the trail. Of course, it is possible that she didn't know these things, but if her father was reporting that there was a habit of her doing this, going off trail and finding her way back, again, it seems like she had the experience to find her way back. Now, there was some hope, however, as the Tennessean noted that imprints of a woman's shoes were found along Parsons Branch Road leading towards Highway 129. Chief Ranger Murnin used a second pair of shoes that Evangeline had brought and checked those against the footprints to match the sizes, and lo and behold, the sizes matched. It also seems that those prints may have been found as part of a dog search, during which the Kingsport Times reported that the bloodhounds picked up a scent from Lorimer's jacket. According to Chief Ranger Murnin, bloodhounds picked up a hot trail near where she was last seen and followed it to the highway, where it ended abruptly. From there, an article claimed that a feeling was growing that she'd likely made it to US Route 129 and then out of the park to safety. And early in the search, it had been considered possible that Evangeline deliberately left the park. To that end, tracers were sent to Cincinnati, Ohio, where she lived and worked, Phoenix, Arizona, where her mother lived and worked, and Lakeview, South Carolina, where she had a friend. Assistant Chief Ranger Harold Edwards, however, disagreed with the sentiment that Evangeline had left the park, according to a June 12th article in the Sentinel. He reportedly did not place much faith in the work of the dogs because the scene was more than a day old. And at this time, according to the papers, this was the longest anybody had ever been unaccounted for in the park, at least out of those who were reported missing. Still, it was at least worth consideration, and the searchers were open to the possibility that Evangeline had left to go and stay with friends or family. Though for what reason she might have done so, nobody could say for certain. Another driving force behind the idea that Evangeline had left the park came in the form of a statement from a Mrs. W.D. Davis. This was the friend in Lakeview, South Carolina, who told investigators that she had received a letter from Evangeline on the 6th. The News and Observer wrote that, according to Davis, Lorimer wrote that she would try to persuade her father to take her to South Carolina later in the month after their camping trip. While efforts to find Evangeline were proving fruitless, they weren't without any silver linings, as a June 13th article in the Tennessean included the story of a 45-year-old woman named Mrs. George Davis who was found during the search. Another annoying thing about these stories from this long ago is that they still use the format of Mrs. Husband's name rather than Mrs. So-and-so, so-and-so, which I guess it doesn't help. I would very much like to be able to refer to this woman by her name, but I can't do that, because I don't know what it is. But as bloodhounds were searching for Evangeline, they came across this middle-aged woman just hiding up in the mountains. Rangers questioned her, curious if she might know anything about Evangeline, but their interviews only found that she had been missing less than 24 hours and she did not know anything about Evangeline. Something she said, however, may have engendered some suspicion against W.H. Lorimer, because the same article reported that Rangers, after hearing from Mrs. Davis, questioned W.M. Lorimer, who again is W.H. and sometimes is reported W.M. Now, while details of that interview are not given, the paper reported that the man maintained he and his daughter had not quarreled and she would have no reason to leave him. On the 14th, the Knoxville News-Sentinel, as well as the Winston-Salem, North Carolina-based The Sentinel, provided several major updates to the case, but they seemed to create more questions than they answered. The Knoxville paper reported that a heel tap, a plastic covering that protects the bottom of a shoe, was found along Route 29. They also reported that the search effort was being cut from 75 professionals down to just 15 or 20. As far as that plastic heel covering goes, Murnan said that the heel tap was found on Route 129, several hundred yards up the road towards Deals Gap Park exit from the junction where the top coat was found. The problem is that this doesn't make a ton of sense because the junction of the trail and Parsons Branch Road, near where the jacket was found, is a lot more than several hundred yards up from 129. Over in Winston-Salem, the Sentinel reported that the tap was found by the road, which seemed to affirm the Rangers' theory that she could have hitched a ride from there. So, based on the variety of locations given in the papers, I'm of the belief that the heel tap was probably found on Route 29, just south of the Parsons Branch Road junction. But in any case, it was believed that that heel tap had come off one of her white nursing shoes. Now, you may be wondering the same thing that I have been wondering, which is, why on earth would you go hiking wearing nursing shoes? But that's what she appeared to have done. And as evidence piled up leading towards the highway, Acting Park Superintendent Robert White said that it seemed more and more likely that Evangeline had hitchhiked her way out of the park. From there, it was impossible to say where she had gone, with the Sentinel reporting she could be anywhere between Seattle, where her father lived, and Havana, Cuba, where she had vacationed the previous summer. Calls were made to any city thought to be a possible destination for Lorimer, but nothing came up. Another important aspect of the reporting from the 14th was the expansion on the coverage of Mrs. W.D. Davis from the Tennessean, who told the News Sentinel, "I know her as probably no one else." She continued, "Van, we called her that, would not deliberately inflict all this anxiety on me and her relatives and others concerned. It's just not in keeping with that good, sweet girl. She would realize the suspense and worry I'm going through. Van was a thoughtful girl, and she confided in me as nobody else." Insisting on the closeness of her relationship with Evangeline, she said, "In this hue and cry over her whereabouts, I'm convinced Van would get a word of reassurance to me if she could." And with regard to the ongoing situations, she suggested, "If she's alive, I figure she's being held somewhere." Now, what struck me as odd with Davis's statement was the changing tenses, because she sometimes uses present and sometimes past. When talking about Evangeline's whereabouts, she uses the present tense. "I figure she is being held. It is not in keeping. If she is alive." But when talking about the sort of person that Evangeline was, she used the past tense. Van was a thoughtful girl, and she confided in me as nobody else. And that was the other thing, the repetitive claim that nobody knew Evangeline like she did. The two reportedly met at God's Bible College in Cincinnati, Ohio, but I could find no further information about Mrs. Davis or how she ended up in South Carolina. And I could not totally confirm who her husband was. I did find a W.D. Davis who was a pastor in South Carolina, specifically in Lakeview in 1951, but the 1950 census lists him as never having been married. Now, it could have been a quick wedding, they could have been living in different places while engaged, but like I said, it's hard to say for certain. And along with all of this was the information that Evangeline's friends and colleagues said she never talked about her family. Mrs. Davis, on the other hand, said that she and Lorimer had discussed her family background at length and in detail. But this may not be as weird as it seems if she and Evangeline really were that close. That is to say, there might have been a legitimate reason that Evangeline Lorimer did not speak to her coworkers or acquaintances about her family. You see, adding to the intrigue here was the news that Evangeline's father had been committed to mental hospitals twice on account of being religiously paranoid and a danger to himself and others. The bombshell came from the state mental hospital in Las Vegas, New Mexico, where he'd been committed from Albuquerque as a dangerous mental patient in 1949. According to the Sentinel, this was due to a domestic violence incident in which his wife testified he had beaten her with a rubber hose. And based on the number of times that he was questioned before this report came out, as well as the number of times it was reported he said that there was no quarrel between him and his daughter, I'm getting the sense that his instability may have been visible. But if it was, he was pretty good at hiding it under pressure, because Chief Ranger Murnin said that his interviews failed to produce anything to indicate this was not all just past history. The day after that report was published was Friday, the 15th of June, 1951, and that is a day that nothing was really reported about this case, this search, any of it. But that doesn't mean that nothing happened. It just means it wasn't in the paper until the next couple of days. On June 16th, the Knoxville Journal reported that a couple by the name of Morrow had brought in a tip as they were headed back to their home in Knoxville. They claimed to have seen somebody matching Evangeline's description a few miles across the North Carolina line, headed toward the Tennessee border. The couple were in the Topoko, North Carolina area when the sighting occurred, just a couple of miles south of where the dogs lost the scent across Cheoah Lake. And if I pronounced Cheoah or Topoko wrong, please tell me, I'll fix it in the future. More information was provided in the Knoxville News-Sentinel for the 17th, which discussed this sighting in much greater detail. Mrs. Morrow told the papers, "I looked at her closely, but we didn't stop, never do for hitchhikers." She did, however, ask herself why she was afoot there miles from a dwelling, and it was that question that jogged her memory about Evangeline's disappearance. They continued driving until they reached Maryville, where they notified the Tennessee State Highway Patrol of a young woman walking along Route 129 towards Deals Gap. They told the patrol the woman was wearing blue jeans and a yellow shirt or sweater. And Mrs. Morrow described her as being about 5 foot 6 inches and 145 pounds, with brown hair, wearing no makeup, looking tired and worn, and her face appearing puffy. And in addition to having clothes that matched those worn by Evangeline, the girl seen on Highway 129 was carrying a shopping bag and a light coat. A trooper was sent out to look for her, and while he was unable to find any trace of the missing girl, a Topoko mail carrier by the name of Henry Morrow, of no relation to the other Morrows by the way, said he may have given a lift to Lorimer. He told the police that the girl wore jeans and a blouse which looked like it had faded yellow stripes, and that she had dark brown hair and appeared to be 21 or 22 years old. He could not, however, recall the color or style of her shoes. She didn't give him a name, but did say that she was from Robbinsville, North Carolina, and she was trying to catch a bus to Knoxville where she had a job. This would indicate that if this was Evangeline, she was in fact hitchhiking up Route 129 from Robbinsville. But was it her? Going by the papers, it's hard to say, because confusing things further was a report from Topoko Postmaster Joe Jenkins, who said that a girl matching Evangeline Lorimer's description came in on Saturday, which is the next day. That said, looking at the article in the paper, this is the paper from the Sunday the 17th, I think this was just a mistake in the reporting, or maybe in the recollection, because it seems very clear that this is the same girl that Morrow gave the ride to. So I'm thinking that saying it was on Saturday was just a mistake on somebody's part. And that was also bolstered by a News Sentinel report, which said that in addition to the tip submitted by the Morrows, a Trailways bus driver said he'd brought a girl meeting Evangeline's description to Knoxville that day. The driver, Pigeon Forge resident Jim Garrett, said that she got on the bus at 2:20 p.m. on Friday the 15th at the junction of U.S. routes 129 and 411 near Maryville, and yes, I know. The girl was the proper height and weight, wore blue jeans, a yellow, in this case it was described as checkered shirt, and pleated hair, and she also carried a suitcase described as medium-sized and old-looking. As with the description given by the Morrows, he said that the girl wore no makeup, but what's more important is that he said she had widely spaced teeth. That's important because Evangeline did have widely spaced teeth, which, so far as I can tell, had yet to be reported in any of the papers. So, getting that right, along with everything else, suggests that this was a legitimate sighting. Her father, however, was skeptical, because one thing that wasn't mentioned in any of the news reports was his daughter's glasses, and he didn't think she would have been able to get very far without them. That said, he did tell police he believed that she had been wearing some kind of yellow and white striped sweater or blouse. Another detail that was reported about Mr. Lorimer on June 16th in the Knoxville Journal was that he had moved his camp to the Chimneys area. And he said that this was so he could be closer to Gatlinburg in order to more easily receive phone messages. And this placed him 21 miles, as the crow flies, from where he'd last seen his daughter, well out of the search area, and along US Highway 441. And that interests me because up until this point, he'd been tagging along in the search. He'd been combing the mountains with the volunteers and the rangers. Why suddenly change direction if you thought she was still in the park? Why move further away from the search area if you thought she was still where you'd lost her? So at this point, it was beginning to look more and more like Evangeline had left the park, and that these were legitimate sightings of the missing girl. Except for one glaring issue with the narrative. Meanwhile, the Knoxville Journal reported on the 16th, Memphis police were making a blanket check of hotels and tourist courts in response to an anonymous report. And the report was sent in by a woman who described herself as a friend of Evangeline Lorimer, who said she spoke to her while she was en route to Phoenix. Supposedly, it was because she wanted to get away from her father and his mental health problems. You could immediately write this off as some kind of hoax, being that the original tip was anonymous, except for the fact that a different tip came in, saying a girl who matched the description of Evangeline, but did not positively identify her as such, had checked into a hotel in Memphis on the 13th and checked out the next morning. And all of this considered, Assistant Memphis Police Chief J.C. McDonald said he believed Lorimer had left the city. And the reason I say this is a glaring issue in the narrative is that I'm struggling to understand how it is that Evangeline, who left Memphis supposedly for Phoenix on the 14th, ended up in Topeka, North Carolina on the 15th. In any case, that same article included a segment on a bit of confusion regarding statements from Evangeline's mother, who the AP had reported received a call saying her daughter was safely en route to Phoenix. And this wire from the AP claimed that Evangeline's mother had refused to identify her informant, which prompted the Knoxville News-Sentinel to follow up on the story. Apparently, the informant who had given Lorimer's mother the information was a Memphis commercial appeal reporter, and there had just been a misunderstanding. The reporter had called to check on the report that Evangeline was heading home, and her mother thought that the questions being given were statements. She told the paper, "The reporter told me very definitely that Evangeline had been seen by a third party in Memphis, a friend of the family, and that she was coming home." Evangeline's mother proceeded to wait at the Phoenix train station on Saturday the 16th, expecting her daughter to return, but of course she didn't, and she said she planned to go and wait the next day as well. In the end, the AP pulled the wire entirely, but it remained true that at least one person had seen Evangeline Lorimer in Memphis, and then 2 days later, she was in the Smokies. And what strikes me is just how confusing that timeline is if we assume these are all legitimate sightings. Now, the first batch of details aren't necessarily odd. On June 6, a postcard was allegedly received by Davis from Evangeline Lorimer, saying, "I'm going to try and convince my dad to bring me to South Carolina after our camping trip." 2 days later, on the 8th, Evangeline was last seen hiking west out of Cades Cove between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. On June 10th, her topcoat was found in the area of Hannah Mountain, not far from a Park Service access road or a Jeep trail. Both those terms are used, and again, it's really hard to tell exactly where this was due to the maps from the time. On June 12th, footprints were located on Parsons Branch Road, and bloodhounds trailed a scent from her topcoat to a spot near Route 129. Where things start to get confusing is on Wednesday, the 13th of June, 1951. Because on June 13th, a woman matching Evangeline's description checks into a hotel in Memphis. And then on June 14th, that same woman checks out of the hotel in Memphis, and a heel tap is found on Highway 129. And then just a lot happened on the 15th. Someone claimed to have spoken to Evangeline in Memphis as she was making her way to Phoenix. Joe Jenkins welcomed a parched-looking girl into his post office but didn't pay her much attention. Either immediately before or after that, Topeka mail carrier Henry Morrow gave a girl matching Evangeline's description a ride, though where is unclear. And then Jim Garrett's bus picks up a girl matching Evangeline's description in Maryville at 2:20 p.m. and proceeds to Knoxville, where he drops her off. And then at 2:40 p.m., the Morrows report a girl matching Evangeline's description walking towards Tennessee on Route 129 from Topeka, North Carolina. Now, after that group of sightings, the trail went cold for a little while, but I think it's important to go over all of that information really quickly. If we follow that timeline, Evangeline would have left Cades Cove, then the park, made her way to Memphis by the 13th, then back to Topeka by the 15th, all of which is possible, but then it gets weird. If Evangeline got onto a bus bound for Knoxville in Maryville at 2:20 p.m., then she can't possibly have been in Topeka, North Carolina to be seen by the Morrows at 2:40 p.m. You might chalk it up to people approximating times incorrectly, but these locations are over 32 miles apart. So the Morrows would have to be off by nearly an hour in order for this to be the same girl. She can't have been in two places at once, so one of the following possibilities must be true. One possibility is that one or both of these girls were not Evangeline. Another, of course, is the possibility that the Morrows were somehow an hour off on their timing. And then the third possibility is that somebody lied. Because as I said, it's not possible for her to get on Garrett's bus at 2:20 and also be seen in Topeka at 2:40. Now, Garrett got the better look, and he described a girl who matched Evangeline from her height and weight to her teeth and clothes. He also said that she carried a bag or suitcase of some kind, and that does line up with the hitchhiker seen by the Morrows on Highway 29. So it seems very unlikely that Jim Garrett was lying about his sighting, especially considering that there would have been other people who could corroborate it. And on top of that, there's something else that feels off to me about the Morrows' report, because they didn't report it at the park or the nearest place they could call somebody. They waited until they got to a highway patrol station near Maryville. And honestly, it's not even that they waited that really bugs me, because people make weird decisions sometimes for no good reason other than they think it's the right thing to do. But it's that they made the report in the town nearest to where she allegedly got on the bus at 2:20 p.m. And then there's their description of Evangeline, which was very detailed for a passing motorist. So in my opinion, it's not out of the question that the Morrows actually did give this girl a ride all the way to Maryville, and then for some reason they didn't want to admit it. I could see a number of possibilities in this vein, one of which could be guilt or shame that they didn't realize it was her until it was too late and she was already out of the car. And I can sympathize here. I can understand why you might want to fudge the truth a little bit about how you encountered her, because people might be mean about it. I could see their thought process being that they had picked her up in Topoco and they had last seen her around 2:40 p.m. when she got on that bus. But of course that would beg the question of Evangeline, if you were going to Knoxville anyway, why get on the bus in Maryville instead of just hitchhiking with them all the way to where they were going? Now of course it's possible that she was trying to get into the city of Knoxville and they just lived nearby to Knoxville and weren't going her direction or weren't going as far as she was. But again, it's worth considering all the possibilities here. But regardless of any of these sightings, Evangeline was in the wind when, on the 21st, something rather unexpected happened. The now 21-year-old walked out of the woods, bruised, scraped, and down 18 pounds, but very much alive. Remember at the beginning of the video when I said this was one of the most inexplicable cases we've ever looked at? It's because of what I'm about to give you, and this summary right here is taken from articles, or is based upon articles, I should say, in the Nashville Banner from June 22nd, the Winston-Salem Journal on the 23rd, the Atlanta Journal for the 24th, and the Leader on the 28th. I took all of the information from that set of articles and then kind of put it into a framework so that it made sense in order, and this is what I got. Evangeline told reporters that she went for a short hike and said, "I just went for a hike up a mountain and took the wrong trail." While many asked, she denied any sort of fight having transpired with her father prior to the trip and said that this really was just a leisure activity. According to her, after departing onto the wrong trail or possibly off the trail entirely, night overtook me, and she said that she got involved in one of the canyons, spending her first night by one of the many streams which flow down the mountains. She said that while she was lost, she walked in circles much of the time, but did try to pick out landmarks so she could follow a straight path. She said she found nice places to sleep on 2 nights, one of which was on soft leaves under an overhanging rock. Other nights, she was drenched by downpours and just huddled up and was miserable. She was also quoted as saying, "June 11th was my birthday. What a way to spend it, shivering and icy cold. That was the day my ankles were so swollen I couldn't walk." Then she continued on, telling the press that she just sat there in the mountains, morose and sodden. As for her injuries, it was reported in the Nashville Banner that she was suffering from blistered feet, insect bites, and briar scratches, and of course was down 18 pounds, but otherwise she was unharmed. And one thing that immediately interested everybody was how she survived that long without eating, as she had told people that all she'd consumed in those 2 weeks was a handful of berries. And in response to further questioning about this, she simply answered, "Why is everybody so interested in food?" She continued, telling reporters, "It's not so important, just experimenting. I had done it as long as a week before." But the second week, the hunger started to get to her. And just to clarify, according to the papers, Evangeline had tried fasting on a number of occasions for up to a week. She had gone up to a week without eating just because she wanted to see if she could do it. Or at least that's what she said. And as for that time period, she told the media, "My stomach was sore on my backbone and I dreamed about food." And during the ordeal, she heard men shouting for her as they looked, and the way she described this was a little confusing. On the one hand, she said she wandered for days, screaming her lungs out whenever she thought she heard searchers nearby, and that she didn't understand why nobody was responding to her. But on the other hand, she was quoted saying, "Several times I could hear my father's voice coming to me from across the mountains, echoing and fading away in the hills. It was so nerve-wracking to hear him and not be able to get to him." And the reason that this is weird is that the Rangers were pretty damn sure that if she was where she said she was, they would have heard her screaming. Also, if she could hear them, they should have been able to hear her. And if this isn't nonsensical enough for you yet, asked how she eventually found her way out, she told the investigators and the searchers that she just decided it was time to come back because she had to be at work on Monday morning. And she further explained that on the night of the 21st, she found a tiny trail through the brush, and as she followed it, she heard cowbells. She followed that sound until she came to the house of a ranger or a ranger station. The reports seem to differ on this. And the Nashville Banner says that an unidentified mountain boy found her. Their account says that she was on Hannah Mountain, which, keep in mind, is where she initially went missing, and that the boy found her there and escorted her to a ranger station. And regarding the whole incident, Lorimer simply said, "I feel really stupid about the whole thing." Rangers couldn't wrap their heads around her story at all, as hundreds of people were out looking for her and she had wandered within earshot of searchers, yet nobody ever heard her respond to their calls. Her explanation, according to the papers, seemed to be, "I'm strong, but I'm not very intelligent." But she'd also told them that she had screamed her lungs out when she heard people looking for her. And there was also another issue, which is that Robert White, the acting superintendent of the park, quoted her as saying that she'd heard them calling but lacked the energy to respond, which of course contradicts her statement that she was screaming. And if she lacked the energy to respond and she had berries around as a food source, why continue fasting? Superintendent White was further, reportedly, confused as ever by Evangeline's remarkably good condition after nearly 2 weeks in the woods with no food, no shelter, or heavy clothing. This confusion only deepened when food wrappers were found in the area where she'd left her jacket, after both she and her father said that she had left without any food. And all of this led to a sentiment amongst the Rangers that Evangeline was never actually lost, and some even suggested that all of this was just a publicity stunt. And they weren't without reason. As it turned out, Mr. Lorimer, and remember, he was a preacher, and the newspapers described him as an evangelist. Well, he had a speaking tour planned through Tennessee and Kentucky shortly after this vacation was supposed to end. So the question then was he crazy enough to fake his own daughter's disappearance for a publicity stunt to push his speaking tour? And was she crazy enough to go along with it? In most cases, one might say no, but we know that this is a guy who had been committed to mental institutions multiple times on account of religious paranoia, and that his daughter was heavily involved in the church, and also his daughter. It's not necessarily a leap and a bound to consider the possibility that she was also as fanatical as her dad was. But officially, the most that the National Park Service was willing to say was that they felt Miss Lorimer might have stayed in the rugged mountains because of her religious beliefs and to test her fasting powers. In response to that, Evangeline was quoted asking, "Why do you have to drag religion into it? Any queerness I have is to my own self." Meanwhile, her father said, "It's a demonstration of the power of prayer." And keep in mind, this is on top of the fact that Evangeline said that she decided to come out of the woods. So she said she was lost for 2 weeks, and then she said that she decided, you know what, I gotta be at work on Monday, I'm coming out of the woods. But then it's also said that she had to find a trail to get out. So did she know how to get out the whole time, or did she find a trail? One of the two they're mutually exclusive here. Did she stumble upon that trail after 2 weeks of being lost, or could she have gotten out at any time? The story just doesn't add up. But perhaps most important of all when we look at this is the people who saw a girl that very much matched Evangeline Lorimer's description outside of the park. So when you take that into account, and then you combine it with the kind of nonsensical story she told about her time in the forest, you have some questions. Maybe it is just me being conspiratorial, but something about this case doesn't add up in a very serious way. And I have some questions, as well as a hypothesis, we'll call it. No one aspect of this case is particularly inexplicable on its own. It's when you start to put them together that at least I struggle to make sense of this narrative. For example, she was last seen sometime around 3 p.m. on June 8th, as she was leaving for a hike. And the question I have there is, why would an experienced hiker leave for what comes out to be about a 10-mile trek with only 6 hours of light left? And on top of that, why would her father let her do that knowing she has a tendency to go off trail? We can infer from what she left wearing, which was again jeans and a long-sleeve blouse or sweater with a jacket on top, that this was a relatively cool day. Following up on that, it would have taken Evangeline 3 to 4 hours to reach the point where she left her jacket behind, at which point there would have only been 2 to 3 hours of daylight left. And that also means that it would have been getting cooler, so why leave the jacket at that point? It probably wasn't just the heat. After all, she had left that day wearing layers. She was wearing long pants, she was wearing a long shirt, and she had a jacket on top of it. And if it was just too hot to wear, why not just tie it around her waist? Another possibility could be that she was going off on one of her little excursions and decided to leave the jacket behind as a marker for where the trail was. Or it could also be that she knew there was a possibility she'd get lost, so she left it there to tell searchers where she'd gone off trail. But of course, an experienced hiker would know not to do that. And then there's the fact that she gave conflicting responses when she was asked why she didn't respond to any of the searchers who were calling out for her. As I'm trying to think of reasons why she might have lied about that aren't, really out there, I can think, one possibility would be that she was traumatized and that was making recall difficult, which would explain why she gave conflicting answers. And another is that she didn't want her father to hear her. She didn't want to be found by him. But when we consider the interviews she gave when she got back, really sounds like being found by her father was exactly what she did want. But then there's the crux of the whole thing, which is if she was really in those woods for 2 weeks, why did the dogs just a few days in follow her down the trail, all the way down Parsons Branch Road, and then out to the highway? Now, I know dogs are not always perfectly reliable, and the Assistant Chief Park Ranger, Harold Edward, he wasn't necessarily on board with the scent trail, but then when you factor in all those sightings, especially the one with the bus, where she matches everything to a T, with the exception of her glasses, it's just really hard to buy that she was not the girl on the bus that day. And as far as that scent trail goes, it wasn't just the scent trail. The scent trail started at her jacket, then led down onto a road where they found shoe prints matching her size, and then all the way out to the highway where people saw a girl matching her description. And of course we have the question of why did she leave the park? If she was really running from her father and trying to get to her mother's place, why not call and tell somebody that? Why allow it to go through an anonymous tip from someone who's supposedly a family friend? Why not just call mom on the phone and say, hey, I'm coming home? Or if the situation was that it was 1951 and her mom didn't have a home phone, why not go to the police office in Memphis, she was an adult, and say, hey, can you call the police office in Phoenix, Arizona, so they can contact my mom to tell her I'm coming home because I'm running away from my dad? And if she was running from her dad, why return to the Smokies, where her dad was? And perhaps more pertinent are the very conflicting statements about her relationship with her father, because on the one hand, you got some people saying that she didn't want to be around him and she was running from him, and then on the other hand, you have her saying, I just wish he would have found me. And then her dad's behavior and background are another piece of this. And this was something I didn't really notice until I kind of got to the end of the research, was with all signs pointing to Evangeline being out of the park, her father insisted over and over and over again that she had not left, that she couldn't have left the park. No, you need to keep searching there. She must be there. Meanwhile, he moved himself 21 miles away from the search area and set up shop near a highway. I also wonder what was meant by religious paranoia and a danger to himself and others. Was this simply that he had kind of out there beliefs about the end of days coming soon and that he beat his wife with a hose? Or was it more than that? I'm not saying that stuff's good or okay, just like there's levels to this. Like, are we talking David Koresh or are we talking Heaven's Gate? And another thing that struck me about this is that Evangeline's close relationships are all kind of weird, at least from what's publicly available. It does not seem like she had a healthy relationship with Mrs. Davis, who, again, repeatedly said that she knew her better than anyone else, and she knows best, and she would tell me. Mrs. Davis really had a very high opinion of how Evangeline considered her. And yet, at no point during this entire ordeal did Evangeline reach out to that woman. Or at least if she did, nobody said anything about it. And then there's the obvious issue of her relationship with her father, who had been institutionalized not 2 years prior for beating her mother with a hose. And while it doesn't seem that her relationship with her mother was necessarily strained, at least from what's in the public reports, they didn't live anywhere near each other, so she's not going to have that support system of her mom. In fact, it seems that the only support system she had were people who were rather religiously fanatical. And I want to be clear that I'm not saying that religious people are fanatical. I'm religious. I'm a Christian. But some people in the community can kind of get some weird ideas. So, considering who her father was and the fact that the only other person she seemed to consider close in the world was also somebody she met through a church, I have to wonder. And that brings me to my hypothesis here. I think it's possible that all of this was planned out. That Evangeline intended to go missing, that was her dad's plan all along, that she was going to go west. She was going to leave her jacket behind so that the park rangers would be on a wild goose chase all through the western portion of the park, while she scooted her way out to Memphis so that somebody would see her there, or possibly just so that she was somewhere west of the park. Then on the 14th, she began making her way back to the park. Meanwhile, her father moved his campsite to Chimneys. And when he moved it to Chimneys, 21 miles from that search area, he plopped himself down right by another U.S. highway. A U.S. highway that, if you were to follow it northwest, would take you straight to Knoxville. I think it's possible that Evangeline Lorimer was sighted multiple times on that road. I think it's possible that she did get on a bus in Maryville, and I think it's possible she got off that bus in Knoxville. And from there, I think she made her way back down that highway, 441, met up with her father, and then I think that she and her father worked their way back to Hannah Mountain, where they dropped her off so that she could come out of the woods right after the Rangers reduced the amount of searchers. This way, she could be back to work Monday morning like she was supposed to be, and I mean, what better way to promote your speaking tour, your revival tour? I mean, what better sermon than standing up there in front of everybody and telling them, I lost my daughter for 2 weeks, and God preserved her, God kept her going, and she came back to me through the power of prayer. I mean, it all just fits too well, and I find it so much less likely that she survived for 2 weeks on nothing but 2 berries and stream water within earshot of the people looking for her. That doesn't work for me. I'm sorry, but no. I'm not going to tell you that I have all of it right and that that's definitely what happened, but for me, that's what the evidence points towards, is that this was staged and that this was simply a situation where you had numerous crazy people influencing one person without a support system who also genetically was likely prone to psychosis. But what I'm curious about is if you guys agree. Do you think that I missed something? Do you think there was something I didn't consider? In a lot of these videos, the first time I do a case, someone will point something out or someone will add new information. And then when I go to revisit it later on, whether that's in some kind of compilation video or a rehashing of something, I will take that information into account. I will add it in. And sometimes I've even changed my opinion. I think the best example of that would be that we had Missing Enigma on, and he and I had a conversation about Charles McCuller. And I had said in our Charles McCuller video that if you were to, anyone who believes Charles McCuller was not a victim of foul play must be stupid or something like that. I forget exactly what I said. Probably not the kindest way of putting it, but the point is, I'm stupid because after Nick explained what he found, I am fully on board with his position on this, and I won't tell you what it is, so you'll go watch his video. But point is, if I pronounced something wrong, if I missed something, any of that, please let me know. And if you want to see the script for this, you want to get the transcript, all that, it is going to be available on Patreon for just $1 at the end of the month, and you should be able to go check the description for a link to the source document. As I said, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $1 a month. That'll get you a whole bunch of fun stuff. The higher tiers come with other gifts and things. I think the highest is a hoodie. If you're not a Patreon fan, you can always join our channel here on YouTube, or you can get our coffee from Tableau Roasting Company. I did not pick it off of a website. I designed it myself right there with Matt, the owner of the company. He is an artisan roaster. He is fantastic. I drink my coffee every morning. We are also so super close to finally launching that bunker branding page, so stay tuned. That's probably this month. If you'd like to get updates about what's going on here at the Lore Lodge, the best way that you can do that is through our Discord, which is bit.ly/jointhelodge. You can get, like I said, updates on what's going on, but more importantly, you can interact with our community. And if you play the same games that I play, every once in a while, you will have an opportunity to play them with me. And of course, as always, if you want more Lodge, you can go check out our other channels, The Weird Bible, The History Hut, my channel, Aiden Mattis. You can also go ahead and check out Aiden Thornbury's channel that exists, and you can see me in high school.
True.
Yeah.
Cat and I slaughtering the British.
Yes, as you should. And another very exciting announcement here is that we have launched the first of our Redacted Media Network channels. That is Off the Record with Luke Eccles, a show where he sits down to do interviews with people in the music industry, from bartenders at bars that do music, all the way up through Scott Staff's manager. So, Creed. And the next show from that podcast network will be dropping in a week or two, which will be, what was it called again? Last Call Lounge with Celso. Celso is our spicy Latino lover who makes us drinks here at the lodge. Boozy mixologist, as he calls himself. I love Celso. Celso's a great guy. God, those drinks are good. Don't they make a cocktail each episode? They make a cocktail each episode. You'll learn how to make a cocktail. And speaking of podcasts, we of course have our own, which is just the Lore Lads. That is our show where we hang out, we talk about what we talk about in these videos in a more casual format, and we also have guests on, like The Missing Enigma, like Roanoke Tales, Mr. Ballin at one point. So it's a fun show. You should come check it out. Just don't expect it to be quite as serious and straightforward as this one. With all of that said, I'm Aiden Madison. Thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.